your time zone.
Yeah, we can start.
Yes, welcome to today's Hack Club AMA with David Hansen, also known as DHH. I am Kiana.
And I'm Sunil.
We are 19 years old Hack Club member from Stockholm, Sweden. We are excited to host this AMA together. DHH is a Danish programmer and the creator of the popular web application from Ruby on Rails. He is also the co-founder of 37signals, the company behind the Basecamp and HEY.
Yeah, it's an honor to have DHH with us today. Ruby on Rails has been a game changer in web development world, making it easier for developers to create web applications. Its simplicity and flexibility have helped many companies like Hack Club Bank, GitHub, and other companies, and startups build their product quickly and efficiently. It's really exciting to have the opportunity to ask DHH about his experience and insight on the development of Ruby Rails and the future of web development.
Yes, David, thank you so much for being with us today. I'd like to start with the first question. What was the moment when you know that you wanted to be a programmer?
Oh, that's a good question, because I thought I knew many times during growing up, because I got my first computer when I was 6 years old. And I thought, oh, this is great. I love computer games. I should learn how to make computer games. And I tried a bunch. I got some magazines back in the days. And now I'm really dating myself. We were typing them in, like the code was literally printed in a magazine, and then you would type in the code yourself to get it to work. And I could never get it to work. I didn't understand the sort of basics of programming. And you're like, all right, well, it takes 7 years old. Maybe that's not that common. But I tried again when I was 12 or 13, I think. I got an Amiga computer, which is a computer that was big in Europe at the time, also around video games. And I tried to teach myself programming. And that was late enough that I actually remember what I couldn't understand. I couldn't understand variables, and I couldn't understand loops. And it's kind of hard to learn how to do programming if you don't understand variables and you don't understand loops. And I tried for quite some time and still couldn't get it. So this was 2 failed attempts, one at 6 or 7 years old, one again at 12 or 13. And then around 15 years old, I met a bunch of programmers, and they showed me all the stuff that they were doing. And all of the stuff that they were doing looked like a bunch of math to me. And math was never my favorite subject in school. And I thought, like, you know what? Okay, this is definitely not something for me. I'm not going to be a programmer. I'm just going to have programming friends, and I'm going to enjoy the things that they make. And it really wasn't until I was 19, 20, something like that, that I started working more seriously building things for the internet. I worked with some HTML a little earlier, but before I got started with PHP and Microsoft has something called ASP, I was 19 or 20. And it really wasn't until I discovered Ruby, the programming language I'm still using today, at age 22, where I thought, do you know what? This programming is something I really want to do. I mean, around 1920, I learned, like, okay, I can do it if I need to, but it's not like I enjoy it that much. At 22, I encounter Ruby, and like the light bulb moment goes off. And I go like, this is amazing. This is what I want to spend my time doing. So it took quite a long time and several attempts before I cracked it and figured it out.
And what kind of game did you started making when you tried one? Was it simple 2D platform, or how did you approach it?
Yeah, it was a really basic game. It was probably Snake or something like that. The first computer I got was an Amstrad 646, I think it was called, or 464. I forget which way it goes, which was kind of like at the same time as the Commodore 64, really basic computers. The Commodore 64 had a processor with 1 megahertz.
Yeah. Oh.
And the reason it was called the Commodore 64 was because it had 64 kilobytes of memory. So it was really basic games, and it was really basic structure. And actually, the programming language was basic. I mean, the Commodore 64, when you turn it on, it starts inside a basic interpreter. So it really encouraged you actually to do programming in a way I thought was really cool. In fact, you couldn't even play a game without doing some code. You had to write load 4,6 or something like that and have your game in there. So you were actually doing programming even just to boot. I think that's one of the things that, like, in a lot of the modern things, particularly on like Android or iOS devices, you're quite removed from what's underneath, and you really have to dig into it. Other things have then gotten endlessly easier to do, and you can get more interesting things on the screen right away. But I do think something is lost when computing becomes this lockdown platform. And I think this is one of the reasons I've been involved with this battle to make sure that the pocket computers we have, the phones that we have, remain open, that you are allowed to install the software of your choice on it, that you're allowed to hack on it, that you're allowed to change it, that you're allowed to customize it. I think this is tremendously important, and we're going to cut off a lot of people getting exposed to programming and getting exposed to making things unless the platforms we use are open.
That sounds great. Do you still play the video games?
Oh, yes. I'm a huge video games fan. In fact, just before I came in here, my youngest son, who's 3 years old, basically wouldn't let me get on the call because I promised to play Fortnite with him. So Fortnite is basically the main game I've been playing for the past 4 years or something like that with all my kids. Sometimes we even play all together. You can play 4 on 4 in Fortnite. So we have a whole squad. I have three boys, and I love video games. Yeah, I have very few regrets generally of how I've done, but if I have any regrets, it's not playing enough video games, perhaps in my 20s and 30s. There's some great games I've missed out on that I have to go back and do. But yes, love video games.
Yeah.
I agree with you. Fortnite is great. We play too.
And the second question was that what do you think about comparing between Scandinavian startup company or like the study we have in Sweden, Norway, between the Silicon Valley in the US side? Can you compare on that one?
Yeah, I think the culture is very different. I think the sort of the company culture, the work culture in the US is all consuming in a way that's not, I don't recognize from Scandinavia. That there's a lot of people, as soon as they start working, they think they're not working right unless they're working 60, 70, 80 hours a week, which I think, when are you gonna have time to play Fortnite if you're working 80 hours a week, right? I don't think that's a healthy way of approaching work, even early on in your career where you might work a little later or more. There's a limit to it, and there's got to be room for other things. There's got to be room for Fortnite. There's got to be room for other hobbies and friends and family and all these other things. So I think that culture of how much time is spent is quite different. But in terms of the programming part, in terms of making things, it's very universal. And this is one of the reasons I love programming, because it is such a universal realm, especially when it comes to open source. I've been working on Ruby on Rails for 19 years now. Literally the year the two of you were born, I started working on Ruby on Rails. And in that whole time, I've worked with people from, I would venture to say, probably 80% of all the countries in the world. There's someone in that country who've contributed to Ruby on Rails, and I've worked with a lot of them. And that is such a joy. It is such an international endeavor to work in open source development and programming in general, but open source in particular. And it's so accessible to wherever you are, whether you're in Sweden or in Denmark or in the US or anywhere else in the world. You can join a community like the open source community and start working on something that you're interested in and meet people from all over the world and help build really cool stuff together. I mean, that is one of those few things where I think the internet has been an unqualified good. Yeah. Like before the internet, if you were a 14, 15, 19-year-old kid somewhere else, you were not going to collaborate with someone else halfway around the world on some sort of project on a regular day-to-day basis. True. The technology boundaries would just prevent that. And I think that's really cool. I think a lot of other things that's happened with the internet are less cool, but that part of it is awesome. And I enjoy it to this day. I mean, just today, earlier today, I was working on a new project I'm working with in the Rails world for how to deploy Rails applications in a new way. And I'm just doing it because I love it. I'm just doing it. I'm sharing it early so that I can get to collaborate with other people and having that reaction from the universe, if you will. You put something out there and then you hear from someone if they like it or if they don't like it, if they want to help you make it better, is incredible. And it's probably my favorite part of programming. It's probably my favorite part of the internet.
Yeah, it's like Hack Club itself is open source community, And like when I joined it and I like understand how it worked and I contributed many of that. So it was interesting on how, like in Sweden side, there is no any hack club culture. Like you don't have any hackathon, like not most of people know. So it was hard starting our own hackathon.
Yeah.
So it was a good start, but yeah.
First.
Yeah. And let's start with asking someone in Hack Club community. Some of the rules are that you can raise your hand in Zoom if you want to ask something with David. And when you start it, you can say what's your name, where are you from, and you can state your question. And let's.
You can raise your hand if you have a question. You can choose.
I'm open for all questions about Fortnite too. It doesn't have to be just programming.
I mean, did you approach any like did you work on any multiplayer games, or did you just did that snake game and went, no, thanks?
Yeah, no, I never got into the games. And it's funny because I actually just recently looked at it again. Like now, I've been working with programming for 20 years now. It should be easy. I should be able to figure this out. And I went back and actually there's this whole interesting community around programming old computers like the Commodore 64. You can program it in an emulator. And I thought that's a good place to start because it's really simple. It's a simple CPU. And I did not make it very far, I must admit, because it didn't take 5 minutes until it was all math again, which is lovely and beautiful. And I am very grateful that there's a lot of people who enjoy working with that every day. That is not the kind of programming that I do. So unfortunately, I had to give up and just accept that I will remain a gamer, but not a game programmer.
All right. So we can start with asking Vincent. You can
ask your question. Welcome, Vincent.
Hi, my name is Vincent from Singapore, and I want to ask you a question. Because earlier you talked about making time for yourself and having time for other things in life. What would you recommend to people who have like too many things going on?
Yeah, so this is perhaps one of those parts where I'm not sure this is actual advice. I'm just going to account what I did. So one example for that was when I was in high school, third year of high school, I was already involved with the internet and I was spending a lot of time with that. I was actually working on a gaming website. I still hadn't learned how to program properly, but I loved working with the internet. And I was working on this gaming website and it was taking a fair amount of my time. And I realized that year, the third year of high school, I had also signed up for advanced math. And I found out very early in the semester that those two things were not compatible. I was not going to do well on my advanced math class and do all the stuff I wanted to do on the internet with this gaming website at the same time. So I blew off the math and I spent an entire year just copying someone else's math papers just that I could turn them in just well enough to pass, which I actually didn't do. I failed the class. But it was a choice. I wasn't going to be able to do both things. And I'm not saying that that's the right answer in all cases, just to blow off your math classes. But there are cases where you're not going to be able to do all of it at the same time. I've done a lot of things in my career and in my life. And a lot of things I've done in episodes, in periods, not all at once. I drive race cars, and it took quite a long time to get good at driving race cars. It was not something I tried to do on top of all the other things at the same time. I've written a good number of books. Whenever we write a new book, my co-writer and business partner at 37signals, Jason, we sort of take time off from the rest of the business to do that. So the first thing I'd say is life is quite long. There's plenty of time to make it all happen, but you can't make it all happen at once, at the same time. You have to say, like, no, we're not going to do that. And the one thing I was never willing to sacrifice was sleep. I love to sleep. And I think I am a smarter, faster, wiser, more efficient programmer because I get 8.5, 9 hours of sleep every night. Again, sometimes for short periods of time, maybe that is something you sacrifice, but I would not recommend it. I feel the same thing about exercise. A lot of these other activities outside of just focusing on intellectual domain like programming or becoming good at something is improved, is enhanced if you don't do it all the time. Like I get some of the best programming ideas that I have when I'm doing something else. when I am either doing a hobby like driving a race car, or I am exercising, or even sleeping. You need something else to sort of prop it all. Even if you want to be the best programmer in the world, in my opinion, the right answer is not to program 16 hours a day. That to make the time you spend on it count. When you want to do programming or race cars or play Fortnite, do that and do it focused and do it for a sustained period of time, and then forget about it when that's not it. Now, again, it all depends on your specific situation. It all depends on what sort of obligations that you have. But I, in my opinion, seen too many people who try to do too many things at too high of a level at the same time, and then they end up with a difficult situation.
Okay, so you would say like your answer would be
cut something out.
Cut something out and tone it down a bit.
Yeah, pull it down a bit such that there's room for these things you really want to do, right? Like, hey, if you have 5 things that you're currently doing and it's stretching you thin, maybe there's only room for 3 on the plate, and you got to make the. One of my favorite sayings is hard choices, easy life. Easy choices, hard life. The easy choice is not to give anything up. And then you have a hard life because all this stuff is on your plate and it's pulling you in 5 different directions. The hard choice is to say, do you know what? I'd love to do all these things at the same time, but I can't. I'm going to take some of them away. Now I'm going to have an easy life because there's only 3 things left on the plate.
All right. Thank you.
Yes, the next person you can ask your question, Thomas Wu. Welcome, Thomas.
Hi, so the question I want to ask is there any opportunities in technology which most people didn't find and explore yet?
Do you know what the problem with that question, and it's a great question, is that if I knew, then it wouldn't be sort of an unexplored opportunity usually. The other thing is that the unexplored opportunities often, they look silly or even dumb or ridiculous to other people. This is something we see over and over again in entrepreneurship. A great example of that was the story I heard from Paul Graham about Airbnb. So when Airbnb started, it essentially started with like, hey, I'm going to rent out a couch in my room and then someone can do it. And the team, Brian Chesky and the others, presented for Paul Graham. And Paul Graham has later recounted that he thought Airbnb was one of the stupidest ideas he'd ever heard in his life, and that there was no possible way this was ever going to be a successful business. And that, in part, is exactly why it became a very, very successful business, because it was not obvious. All the great unexplored domains, they're not obvious. It's not obvious that it's a good idea. It's not obvious that it's going to be a great business. And this is why investors like Paul Graham and many others simply accept the fact that they can't tell in advance that someone who has an idea that sounds really dumb, to some extent, is almost a prerequisite to it being a big idea. Because if it was obviously a good idea, then someone else would already have done it. Now, the problem is you can't tell the difference between ideas that actually are not very good and the ideas that just appear to be not very good because they haven't been explored. But yeah, because the thing is, if you say any of the current hot domains, if you say AI or virtual reality or self-driving cars or anything, this is all where the excitement is. All of it is flowing into that as the moment. So like that has sort of already sailed that ship in terms of being the big next thing. So yeah, I don't think there is a great answer. I don't think anyone has a great answer, to be perfectly honest. That's not very helpful, but that's how I see it.
Thank you.
Actually, let me follow that with just one additional thing, which is you don't need a totally unexplored, amazing, untouched domain to do well. When I started working in web programming, the web had been around for a long time. I didn't invent the web. I didn't invent anything in it. And there are tons of people making web technology. When we started our new email service, hey.com, Gmail had and still has 1.6 billion customers. Like we are 30 years late to email in terms of being a novel, new, interesting thing. And you know what? It didn't matter you can come with new ideas to well-established domains and do very well. Sometimes you don't even need that many new ideas. You just need to do things a little bit better. Can you do it 2% better? There are so many successful businesses that are built on doing something that already exists 2% better than what it already is out there. So I would recommend not falling too much in love with finding this totally huge unexplored territory that you can have to yourself entirely. That is a tall hill to. You're more likely to just fall into that by accident rather than go looking for it. But what you absolutely can do is take a domain that already exists and see, do you know what? Can I find 2%? That is very doable almost everywhere.
So first we need great ideas and we need a way to succeed.
Well, I'd say you don't even need that great ideas. You need a handful of ideas that are slightly better than what is already out there. And then you need something that you actually care about, especially when you're building it yourself, if it's a side project or something else. Sometimes you can fall in love with, oh, this is such a good idea because I believe that a lot of people might like it. I always find those very difficult. Do you know what I find easy? I find easy solving my problems. Can I find something that I find a little annoying where I think I could do something 2% better because I know a lot about it? That email example is a good example. I've been using email since 95. So I've literally been using email for, 27 years. I had a lot of opinions about how email should work by the time I started building my own email client, just because I'd used something for a long time. So I think that's also a great source of inspiration, something that you've been doing a lot, using a lot, and realizing, you know what, that this could be better. I just want to sort of bring down the bar is that you don't have to have this amazing idea before you start working on something. You can start with something that either seems like a dumb idea, Airbnb, and turns out great, or something that just is 2% better than an idea you already know about.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Then let's begin with next person who is Luander. You can ask your question.
Welcome.
All right. I'm Luander from Brazil, and I would like to ask, how do you organize all that stuff, like the Ruby on Rails, your email thing, all that startup thing that we all know?
Well, I'll go partly back to the answer I gave earlier, which is it didn't happen all at once. I mean, if you look at my sort of career building things, it's been 20 years. I've been working on Basecamp for 18 years. I've been working on HEY now for 2.5 years. Like I take one thing at a time and then I care immensely and deeply about it. And then I work on that thing until it's good. And then I put it back on the shelf and then I go do something else. And this is what I find often when people look at a CV or something else and they see all these things and look, how can anyone have time to do all these things? Yeah, they didn't do them at the same time. They didn't do them all at once. And this is one of the factors of simply getting old, is that if you keep working the whole time, eventually you will have accumulated a lot of things you have worked on. And I mean, I'm 43 now, so I've worked for quite a long time. I've been working with the internet since I was 14. That's almost 30 years. I mean, there should be a lot of stuff, right, on the list of things that you've worked on if you work for 30 years. So I wouldn't get kind of like, I've heard sometimes that people can get intimidated by that. Oh, I'm so far in my career and I haven't done all these things. Most people haven't, and it's totally fine. So I focus on one thing mostly at the time. When we were working on HEY, I didn't work on Basecamp basically at all. I was just focused on HEY, and that was the main thing I was working on. And then after we released that, I went off and did some other things. So putting things back on the shelf, only having a couple of things at your plate at a time, but then finishing them. There's also an endless number of people who've started 5,000 different things and they didn't finish any of it. And it's a little hard to really learn something if you don't finish it and if you don't get it into the wild. It's always good to start something, and that could be a lot of fun. But I've learned more from finishing things than I have from starting things. So I would recommend having fewer things on your plate and then just finishing them, getting them out there, and then go like, okay, that's it. It's great. It's not that you have to work on it forever, but finish it and then get it out and then get something new on the plate. And that comes back to that like hard choices, easy life thing, is that if you think of your plate of things you can work on at any given one time is like one work thing, one hobby thing, and maybe some video games and some family time and some friends, like that's it. There's not room for like 10 work things at the same time. Humans don't multitask well at all. In fact, they don't multitask at all. They just switch between tasks. And if you work at 3 things at the same time, you're going to finish those 3 things much more slowly than if you work at one thing at a time 3 times in a row.
Makes sense. I actually would like to make another question, which is how do you normally choose your projects? Because for me, like my brain doesn't stop. Literally, I having ideas every fucking time, so it's hard. How do you kind of look through it and say, no, that's the idea I'm gonna do?
No, it's a great question, and it's a good problem to have. Is to have too much too much creativity or too many ideas. But just know that like sort of finishing things comes from saying no. You say no to 100 things, and then you say yes to one thing. And then the one thing you say yes to, you do it all the way and you do it fully. And I find is I just work on the idea I'm most interested in. My best idea. Work on your best idea. Don't work on your second best idea. Don't work on your third best idea, especially if you think, oh, my third best idea, maybe some other people think that's a better idea. No, no, no. Work on the idea you think is the best idea. It may not be the best idea and may be a failure. So what? You work on your best idea, you finish it, and then you get to work on another idea. If that didn't work, okay, so what? Then you learned a bunch of stuff. This is the other thing. Don't look at, like you finish something. I've worked on a bunch of things in my career that never went anywhere. That we put it into the market, no one cared, or I pushed it out, or I've written a great blog post, and I think like, wow, everyone's gonna like this. No one gives a damn. And and sometimes I work on something, I don't spend 2 minutes on it, and it blows up and it becomes a huge thing, either as a product or as a blog post or something else. It's very difficult to tell what other people will like. So just focus on working on things you like first, and then let the world sort of come as it may after that. But just accept that you will have far more ideas than you will ever be able to accomplish. Generally speaking, the most accomplished people that I meet are the ones who are able to stick with things. They may have a lot of ideas, they may have a few ideas, but if they can stick with something, eventually that thing they stick with is going to turn out well.
All right, thank you so much.
Yeah, and the one you said, like making it having a one goal, not having like multiple projects ongoing. Like I have the same problem, having like I start making something, but I get interested on another thing, so I start making that thing, but I never complete the first one. So that was my like this year goal, to just focus on one, complete it, and then go on it. But
Yes.
we move now next with next question, which is society.
Welcome, Saidi.
Hello, hi David. My name is Sahidi. I'm a hack clubber from Atlanta, Georgia, and I do really relate to like all this conversation about having so much on your plate and not knowing where to start. But I think something that really defines people in general are the values that and messages that like they carry with them for their lives. So like, what's like an ethical value that you try to incorporate everywhere, like your personal life, your professional life?
I think that's a great question. And this is one of the things that took me too long to start spending time on, is to really clarify my own ethical framework, and not just ethical framework, but approach to life in general. And I'll just plant a little seed here for an approach to life called Stoicism. This is something that I've discovered that has been tremendously helpful for me to sort of organize my thoughts and views on the world. There's a single book that's very quick to read. It's like a 45-minute read. It's probably the best book I've ever read at that the size, which is very short. It's called The Manual by Epictetus. I would extremely highly recommend that you all read it. It's very approachable, and basically all the ways that I think have been influenced by this. But rather than Stoicism, I think there's also just the golden rule: treat others like you would want to be treated yourself. I find this over and over again, where input to what to focus on and how to work comes from how I feel like when I'm treated, perhaps sometimes poorly, by corporations or others or whatever. And I realized, you know what? I can get mad about the fact that I was treated badly or that corporation was not fair or something else like that. But first I can look in the mirror and say, like, you know what are the circumstances? What are the times where I did the same thing? And then I can use that mirror and like, you know what? I've done that too, I'm sure. I've sometimes been rude or sometimes been short or I've been unfair. And then seeing that in the mirror is, to me, an incredibly effective way of changing your behavior. Because it's so easy to think, oh, well, I am very fair, I'm very kind, I'm never mean, I'm all these things when you're just thinking about it in your self-image. But when you see the reflection in someone else's behavior and how they make you feel, it becomes far more easily accessible in the ways you're falling short yourself. So I like that part of it. But I'd say otherwise, the larger answer to the question is, for me, is stoicism and the ways of approaching the world. I'll take just one example of this, which is something called negative visualization, which is if you've had good things, well, whether you've had good things or bad things happen to you in your life, if you take the good things that are in your life right now and you think, you know what would happen to me if that went away, if something bad happened? We can start, in my case, at the easy level, which is the business. I've been running this business I'm in now for 20 years. What would happen if we made a really bad mistake and the business went out of business, if we went bankrupt? Either we had a security breach of some calamity or we made some terrible mistake. How would I deal with that? And preparing yourself for it. And as you work through that, you realize, you know what? The things you think are so terrible, they become less terrible if you spend some time preparing for them. So when it comes to the business, for example, I think, do you know what? If it was over tomorrow, I would have had 20 amazing years working on 7 different products that influenced all these different people. I got to work with some incredible coworkers over that time. That should be cause for celebration. No, most people don't get 20 years at a single company to do all these other things. That's enough. I mean, I'm already living on sort of, if not borrowed time, then gravy time, right? This is all extra. As I think through these things, it becomes much easier to deal with difficult situations at work. I've had some difficult situations at work where things were challenging or threatening. And then I can go back to that negative visualization and think, you know what? Even if the worst thing happened, we went out of business, we had to lay off all our employees, I could still look back upon that and be happy. So it's a way to train yourself to be less anxious about things that might happen and less anxious if they do happen, because they will. If you live almost any amount of time, you will face hardship, you will face heartbreak, you will face difficulties. That is just built into the human experience. And I'd say the earlier you get ready for that, get prepared for that, the easier it will be when it inevitably happens to you as well, which is, again, final plug here for Stoicism. It really is a training course for all the things that life throws at you.
Thank you so much for that answer. I love it so much.
Yep. Welcome, Peter. You can ask your question from David now.
Okay. So, hi, David. I'm Peter. I'm from Singapore. Same as Vincent. We're actually in the same school. So my question is, when you built Ruby on Rails, why did you name it like on Rails? So
yeah, good question, because it's funny. I've heard this. I'll answer it a little roundabout way. I heard it. I think it was Phil Collins who was talking about like writing songs and people reading all sorts of deep meaning into his lyrics, and him remarking that he was so surprised about this because he just made up gibberish words. Like it just sounded good. And that was the reason the lyrics were the way they were. They weren't because he had thought about it intensely, deeply for a long time. It was because that just flowed, right? Ruby on Rails is a little bit like that. I could not get rails.com. Like, right, that's okay. A short word. So getting a short domain is almost impossible. So I couldn't get that. So RubyOnRails.com was available. And I thought, like, you know what? Rails owes so much to Ruby. Let's just call it that. And it turned out to be one of those blessings in disguise, which is there's so much of life, which again is connected to the Stoicism thing, where you think, oh, this is terrible. I can't get the domain for my new thing. Someone else has that name. This is something I should be sad or mad or annoyed or disappointed about. When in fact, it just opens another door. And I put on Rails, and it turned out it was a much better name. It really resonated with people in a way. A bunch of people tried to copy it in various ways. They would do Rails on PHP or Rails on Perl or something else like that. So much of life is these happy accidents that just, as it unfolds, you realize, oh, actually, it was fine. And not only was it fine, in many cases, it was better. So Ruby on Rails was just because I couldn't get the domain. There's nothing deeper in it than that.
All right. Thanks.
Yeah, let's move on with next member, who is Rishi. You can ask your questions.
Welcome, Rishi.
Hello, my name is Rishi from Austin, and I'm wondering, like a couple months ago, I remember you switched Basecamp to per seat pricing until December 31st. What caused you to keep the per seat pricing going forward? Like, how did that play out?
Yeah, it's a great question because the answer is not in yet. So we had, for the longest time, Basecamp's been around for 18 years. For like 17 and a half of those years, we did not charge per seat. We charged fixed price in these different categories. And for the past 4 years, I think 5 years maybe, we've just had one price, $99. That's what it is. We thought we had lost what we called the low end, that people just getting started, the barrier to entry with Basecamp was too high. It was too much money if you were just one person or two people just starting out. And we thought we had lost some people there, that it wasn't apparent when we did it because the money looked good. Like we had some cheaper prices before, then we got rid of the cheaper prices and we got fewer customers, but we made more money. And we thought, like, as long as we make more money, it's better. But that's often not how it goes, because we make more money from fewer people. And that sometimes have these rolling stone effects, where if you sign up fewer people 5 years ago, there are fewer people to tell other people about the product. So there are these network effects where you lose out. And we thought we had lost out. So we thought, you know what? We're also not afraid of experimenting. We're not afraid of admitting that we're wrong. We're not afraid of admitting that maybe the time is now wrong, that it was the right time to charge a single price 5 years ago, and it's the wrong time to do it today. So we thought we're just going to experiment. So we ran the first experiment until the end of the year, and it was inconclusive, which is really annoying when experiments are like that. But many of them are. They are inconclusive, and you don't get the final answer. You don't get like, this is the right way, this is the right way. We didn't get that, so now we keep going. We're still experimenting. We've just changed the prices a bit. We've now have both some per seat pricing and a fixed price at a higher level, but we're not done experimenting, which is also one of these fun things. Again, you could look at that and go like, oh, I'm so annoyed that the first hypothesis I had for our new pricing strategy didn't work. And I just look, this is just interesting. Then we get to try another hypothesis. Then we try another thing. And we will keep trying until we find something that's better. And we will be curious and fascinated along the way. So much of this stuff, when it comes to business, is so fascinating. And no one knows. No one knows what the right price is. No one knows what the right mix is. The only way you find out is by testing it, is by trying it. And I mean, this is part of what's fun. If you knew all the answers up front and if you could always guess right, what interesting part would there be of being in business? I love not knowing everything. I love being wrong. I like being rigorous. So I don't mind being wrong, but I want to be wrong sort of definitively so. I don't want to be wrong because we didn't do the math right or we didn't do the statistics right. I want to be wrong because like the hypothesis was bad and then we can come up with a better one.
Just a reminder that
Thank you for answering that.
Just a reminder that we are now in 20 minutes till the end. One of the question is asked by Matt, who is not in this call, but he had wrote it on Slack. The question is, in both your YouTube series on writing software, and throughout the companies they blog, there have been real code shared from the actual code base of Basecamp and HEY, which are both very successful commercial products. Were there any concern intentionally posed over this unique sneak peek, and what's your take on the impact it had and the impact you hope to continue having on the greater real community?
Yeah, that's a great question because it's one I've been fascinated with for the past 20 years. And it goes something like this. We are a small independent company. We've not raised a bunch of money from venture capitalists. We can never compete directly head on in marketing with the likes of Slack or Monday or Asana or any of these other companies that's raised hundreds of millions of dollars with the explicit purpose of basically setting them on fire, of just spending as much money as quickly as possible, buying all sorts of advertisement left and right. We're never going to do that because we're spending our own money and we don't have hundreds of millions. So we have to make the money count, which in part means that we spend very little of it on marketing. But we still have to get out there. We still have to make the market aware of our products and build a brand and so forth. So what can we do instead? And there's this wonderful lady whose name is Cassie Sierra. She's not that much in the internet anymore, but you can still find things from her. She used to write a blog called Creating Passionate Users. And one of her posts was about this problem. What do you do if you don't have as much money to spend on marketing as your competitor? What we do is we try to out-teach instead of outspend. We have so many lessons. We have so many learnings that we've had over 20 years of running this business that we can share in an incredibly honest way that no one would ever get permission to do if they had to ask someone else. For example, sharing real code from our code bases. You never see this on the internet usually because someone is not allowed to do that. They feel like they have to ask the boss of the boss of the boss of the boss before they're sharing their secret sauce, intellectual property, blah, blah, blah. And we just go like, this is not secret sauce. No one is going to run us out of business just because they know our recipe, which is a great parallel to this, which is famous chefs. So most famous chefs are famous in part because they publish cookbooks. They literally give away the recipes on how they make their food. Are they worried that someone is going to take that cookbook, open a restaurant right next to theirs, and then compete them out of business? No, because that's silly. Because a restaurant is so much more than just the recipes of the food. Am I worried that someone's going to take a code snippet that we share from HEY or Basecamp, and then they're going to make another HEY or another Basecamp, and then they're going to run us out of business? No. So it is just gold laying right there that has no value unless we share it. So for us to use this real code to out-teach the competition is one of those perfect things that you get to do when you don't have to ask someone permission. I find it silly because it makes perfect sense to me. You learn the most by looking at real things. In fact, I would say much of what's wrong with computer programming and programming frameworks are that they're built by people who are working towards toy examples. They're working on toy examples. They're explaining the framework with toy examples that never interact with the real world. And the real world is a sticky, messy, difficult place where oftentimes your solutions totally have to change. That doesn't fit so neatly into something that could fit in an example. So I always try to guide my programming with real code. I developed Ruby on Rails. I did not develop Ruby on Rails. I extracted Ruby on Rails from the solutions I'd already made to real problems that we had encountered on our products. So this is the same thing we do when we share real code. And I wish more companies, programmers would do it. It's very rare. So we're going to do more and more of it. We just started a new blog on dev.37signals.com where we share a bunch of real code. Look up the 2 posts by Jorge, one of our programmers. He shares a bunch of real code out of Basecamp and out of HEY. And we're going to continue to do that. I love looking at real code.
Yes, thank you for your answer. The next person is Ramiz. Welcome, Ramiz. You can ask your question now.
And let's try to do it in like speed font
Yeah,
type.
we don't have so much time.
Hi, David. I'm Ramesh, and this is a question from a YouTube live stream from Andres. So he asked, hardware is a great new addition to Rails. How do you see its adoption so far? Thank you.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch. What's a brand new addition?
Hardware.
Hardware.
Hardware. Yeah.
Sorry, Hotwire. Yes,
Yeah,
of course. Sorry, my mistake. Yes, so Hotwire is something I'm super passionate about because it is basically sort of like the second big solution after all the way back to Ruby on Rails that I've worked on, which is to try to solve the front end that is the JavaScript part, the HTML part, in a better way. I've been working with web development for a very long time, and I've been really annoyed with the rise of some of these front-end frameworks like React and Redux and a bunch of the other stuff that's going on, because I thought it's way too complicated. It's way too difficult to set up. It's way too difficult to use. It usually ends up splitting the people who work on the product into front-end developers and back-end developers, which in my opinion is absolutely nonsense. We should be working with tools that are easy enough that we can just have developers. That is someone who can create an entire application from beginning till end, from front till back. And we can only do that if our tools are simple enough. And the front end got extremely complicated for a long time. And that didn't mean there weren't good ideas and there weren't good things to take out of React. But Hotwire is a solution in our approach to making it much simpler, to get most of the benefits from these sophisticated front-end tools without having it be so difficult that you need a damn degree just in those tools alone to be able to make anything. So I think it's going pretty well. I don't think it's sort of setting the world on fire in the same way that Ruby on Rails did originally when it came on. There's just way too much competition and people use different things. But it is enabling my ultimate dream, which is the one-person framework. I created Basecamp, the original version of Basecamp, as a single developer, doing everything from HTML to Ruby to all the way through. I want that to be true. I want a single individual to be able to build competitive web applications all the way through. And I think it's very difficult to do that if you have to learn 10,000 difficult things at the same time. Hotwire, together with Rails, is the best answer I have for something a single individual can learn and be productive enough in that they can build something real that can grow into a proper business if they want to make it a business, or just be a fun hobby if that's what they want. And yes, you can use Hotwire without Ruby on Rails. So Hotwire is agnostic in that end. You can use it with Python or Perl or even other JavaScript stuff if you want. And quite a few people have, but I use it with Ruby on Rails.
Yes, we have another Shubham here. Welcome, Shubham. You can ask your question. Shubham, are you ready?
No, we cannot hear you.
Can you hear me now?
But now, yeah,
Yes.
you can hear you. You can go ahead.
Okay. My main question is, what is a good reliable way to get your first users? And to that point, how did you get your first users for Basecamp and like?
Yeah, that's also a great question. It connects to that same lady I was just talking about, Kathy Sierra, who had a lot of things to say about this. And perhaps inspired by her writing, but also our own, is this thought of building an audience. This was what we started with. Before we even had products to sell, Jason and I, my business partner at the company, tried to build an audience. And we built an audience by writing a blog back in the early 2000s. We built an audience by participating in mailing lists and creating a following. It's kind of gotten sort of tainted a little bit now. Like, it sounds like influencer, which is not a word I'm particularly fond of. But this idea that before you have something to sell, be someone would want to buy from. Like that's at least in part the strategy that we've used, and we've continued to use that strategy. And this is where the whole out-teach idea comes in. If you've taught someone something, just a lesson or an idea or whatever, they're way more likely to be interested in what you have to sell. Now, you have to be quite disciplined to separate those two things out. There's the absolute worst thing is to feel like you're constantly being sold. Hey, I just want to learn something. I want to hear what you have to say. I don't want to constantly be sold like you're a marketing machine or an advertisement machine. But I do think it is a successful way of getting a start, getting some spotlight. But I'd also give some context. When we launched Basecamp, we had 5,000 followers on our blog. 5,000 is not a lot by modern standards. There are legions of cats on the internet that have more followers than we had when we launched Basecamp back in the day. So you need something. I think there are a lot of people who put a lot of time into something. They put it out, and it's like a tree that falls in the wood when no one's around to hear it, right? It can be discouraging. Now, the first thing is to actually step back one step further and make sure you only work on things that feel like they were worth your time if they fail. This is an incredibly important lesson for me. I've worked on a couple of things in my career where they were only worth it if they succeeded. And then a couple of them did not succeed. And then I was filled with regret that I had wasted my time. If you only work on things that you would have been happy working on, even if they fail, you can't waste your time. Then you reach the end of it and you've built something where you learned a lot, you finished the project, you developed these habits and these tools and these skills that took you there. And so what if no one else liked it? Now, it might have been nicer if they did, but you can look at that and go like, I'm still proud of what I worked on. I'm still happy with what I worked on. I'm not full of regret, because the problem is very close after regret comes sort of cynicism. No one's ever going to care about anything I ever built because they didn't like this one thing, which is total nonsense. As I said, I've worked on a bunch of things in my career that no one gave a damn about. I've seen plenty of other hyper successful entrepreneurs who worked on things no one ever gave a damn about. And if they had gotten so discouraged that their early attempts did not become a big success, they would never have built the thing that then later became a big success. And you know what? It doesn't even have to become a big success. You can work your entire career or life. As long as you work on things you feel like this was worth spending my time on, even if it failed, you won. You spend your time, you spend your days working in ways that made you happy, where you learned more things, where you got better. So that's a really long way of saying building an audience is a strategy that we've used. Be careful not to become an influencer. That is a toxic hole, I think, for a lot of people, where you end up being distorted by your audience. You end up with audience capture, where you no longer know, are you actually building things for yourself, or are you building for your audience? There's supposed to be some symbiosis, but there are plenty of influencers who've gotten devoured by your audience and they don't know who they are themselves anymore. So don't do that. And then just build cool stuff that you would be happy to buy if someone else had made it. This is the other heuristics that I use, is that I built things that if I hadn't built it, I would be like so happy that someone else had, because then I could just buy it.
I see, thank you. And in these original blogs, what exactly did you put out if you weren't really building much at that point and to get a following?
So we were running a consulting company at the time. So we were having consulting clients, and we were just blogging about the state of the industry, what we've learned, our observations, something. You don't even need customers to do any of those things, though. You need to have something where you know something, although I wouldn't even say that. I've been blogging since, I think, 99. So since I was like 20 years old. The first blogs that I put out, oh my God, they're still online, some of them, and you can find them on Google, and they're terrible. Like, I was a terrible writer, as every writer is when they start writing. The only way to become a better writer, which is a key to building an audience on the internet, although you can also do it with video, but if you're going to build it with the writing, is to write a lot. I write almost every day. And you know what? There's a lot of it that's not very good. And you simply need to keep going. This is the same thing with programming. The way to get better at programming is to program a lot, to just keep programming. And some of it is just going to be crap and it's not going to be good. And you're just going to keep going. And eventually someone's going to look, oh my God, it's amazing what you wrote. How did you get so good at writing? Like, yeah, I wrote 10,000 blog articles over a course of 10 years. So some of it is just that perseverance. And you only get that perseverance if you have intrinsic motivation. That really is the bar for me, is that the thing itself has to be enjoyable to you. If you're forcing yourself to do something you really don't like to do, it's not going to be sustainable. You're not going to be able to do it for 3, 5, 10 years. You're going to run out of enthusiasm for it. So you need intrinsic motivation. You need to work on something you actually care about. It still needs to be difficult. If it's not difficult, if it's not painful, if it's not hard, you're not learning. Like, it is just a fact that if you're reaching and you're getting better, it hurts a little bit. Like training, you lift weights that are slightly heavier than the ones you can actually lift, because then you break down your muscles and then they grow back stronger. The same thing with the neuron and the pathways you have in your brain. You need to actually break them. You need to rewire them. And you only do that by doing difficult things.
Okay.
Thank you, Shubham. And we are now like 5 minutes. It's 5 minutes left, so we have 3 special questions. Like act we will do. One is a pop face. If you know David, do you know how the emote works? Like you have to recreate the pop face. Like, can you do that?
Out the puck face? I don't know what the puck face looks like. This is where I'm not in touch with the latest meme culture, I think.
Anyone want to show? Billy?
Billy, do you want to explain for us?
Yep, you just kind of do like a little O and like you're like shocked. Yes. Perfect.
Yeah, that's the YouTube thumbnail pose. Yeah.
And then
Yes. For the last question, I think. We are a network of high school programmers from around the world. Do you have any question from us?
For us.
For us, yeah.
Ooh, yeah, that's a good question. Well, first of all, I commend you for doing that. I commend you for being involved with these things and trying to work and improve and have fun doing it at the same time. I got started myself quite early in a lot of things, including the internet. When I was 14 years old, I was traveling to computer conferences by myself and always being sort of the youngest in the group. And I think I just learned a tremendous amount of that. So getting involved with something like this and getting involved with others who care about the same thing, incredibly powerful. And it's a way to build up that intrinsic motivation. You're not alone in the world with wanting to learn things and becoming better at things, which is something that can carry you forward for a very long time. So thumbs up to everyone who's involved with this and spending time on it. And also realizing, you know what, sometimes these kinds of things, as I gave the anecdote, it would be more important than things you're doing in school. They're setting you on the trajectories. They're setting the intrinsic motivation. They're setting the paths for something that you're going to carry forward long after you're done with school. So sometimes you see these things as frivolous, and I could imagine the parents sometimes like, oh, you should be spending your time on like your studies or your homework or whatever. Like, this is my studies. This is my homework. This is important. So that would be, my passing words on that.
Yeah. And like it's about like end of hour, but we had other questions, and we wanted to ask if we could email that later after this AMA. And
sure.
Yep. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I can take one last question too. I saw Saga had a question he mentioned in the blog. I'll answer quickly.
Yes, sure.
So, do you believe that open source programming or open source software development plays an important role in shaping the future of software programming and the lives of the future programmers?
Yes, hugely. I think open source software, the whole movement, is probably the most important thing that's happened overall in all of software development in the time I've been involved with software development. Now, partly I would say that, of course, because I spent the majority of my time working on open source software. I built my career on open source software. But it just seems like such a breakthrough of collaboration, a form of working, an intellectual model of co-development that's beautiful and actually surprising. Like the birth of software was all commercial closed source software. Microsoft called open source software cancer at one point in its lifetime, and now open source has conquered all, because I think it is simply the better way of building infrastructure level software. This is why almost all infrastructure software today is open source software. It coexists with commercial software and other forms of free software, but to me, open source software is amazing, and it's particularly amazing for students. It's particularly amazing for people who learn. I learned everything I know about Ruby by reading the Ruby standard library, which is written in Ruby. You can just open those files and you can start reading through them. Anyone who wants to learn about Rails, you can start reading through Rails. You can take one feature and you can just dive down until you reach the actual source code. It's an incredible way of learning how things work in a way that was not possible before open source software. So open source software today, open source software in the future, I think open source software is going to be the thing to stick around with and use as you primary training ground for all new software developers.
Thanks for answering my question.
Yes, thank you so much for joining us. And I had an incredible time. And to the end, all AMAs, we have like normally unmute and say thank you. So can everyone
Unmute and say thank you.
yes.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Thank you so
you.
much.
Hope you have
Thank you.
yes.
Thank you.
Thank
My
you
pleasure.
so
Thank you
much.
so much. Have a great day.
You
You
too.
too. Hope you have
Bye.
a great evening, David,
Bye.
and have fun playing Fortnite.
Happy
with
Chinese
your
New Year,
son.
New Year, everyone.
I'm going right in to play Fortnite with my youngest right now. So yes,
Yeah.
indeed.
All right.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.